Welcome to the latest episode from Isolation to Inspiration. This podcast is conceived so that Paul, Boross and I can meet with motivational leaders to get a fresh perspective on the current state of the world whilst learning and laughing. We attempt to unpack the underlying psychology and humour of hugely successful people.
Our guest on this edition of From Isolation to Inspiration has been on stage, on screen and on air for over 30 years. You might know him best as the voice of Siri on your iPhone or from programmes like BBC Television's The Weakest Link. His velvety vocal tones are hugely in demand for clients wanting to be coached in confidence or to create charisma at conferences. At international events, he's frequently booked as the voice of God. Jon Biggs, welcome to From Isolation to Inspiration.
I'm so pleased you could read my writing. I didn't know I'd written such a great description of myself, but thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, how has the voice of God been coping with isolation?
With ups and downs, I think, like most people. There's a really funny thing about lockdown that for no reason whatsoever you have really high days and no reason whatsoever you suddenly have a very low day. And you can't predict what either of them are going to be or when they're going to turn up. They just occur. And I haven't got a science behind it. I've got no idea why it is. But you have this kind of roller coaster ride throughout. I mean, I'm somebody who's quite used to living on their own. I'm quite used to traveling on my own, as I know you guys do as well. That kind of tedium of, get to the airport, go through security, sit in the lounge by yourself, get on the airport craft. The real joy, sitting next to somebody that you know that you can talk to. Get off the aircraft, get in a taxi, get to the hotel, do the job, wave at the client, get back. We're used to all of that. But lockdown is a completely different example of that. I'm not sure that having any experience in doing a lot of things by yourself is of major benefit here. I think there's a huge learning curve.
Well, I was about to say that I missed those days when I had a 6-hour delay. I miss those days when I was sitting next to the overweight person next to me that literally took his seat and a quarter of mine.
Fighting for the armrest.
Yes.
I mean, that is an Olympic sport on airlines that I'm not sure that many people understand or realize. But yeah, there is, particularly on 12 or 13-hour flights, because you've got to establish superiority early on in that relationship.
Absolutely.
Do you think now that with hindsight, people are going to change and actually people are going to be delighted when they get the middle seat on a plane?
Or does that mean you just suffer more opportunities for people to cough on you? It was a really interesting thing because people said, no, it's fine. You can put people in the middle seat because people don't cough sideways. And I'm going, how little do you know about the trajectory of spittle when somebody coughs? Yeah. And then somebody else has also done these incredible kind of scientific blueprints of how far your spittle goes when you cough. And it travels at 70 miles an hour across, 9 meters or something ridiculous. And if you're jogging, it's even worse. And cyclists can leave it for 3 miles behind them. And it goes on and on and on. And you just go, we've entered a weird era in our lives now. I quite like the fact we're kind of living through history, but there are elements of anybody living through history where you go, that's just rubbish. What are you talking about? Why are you talking why have you even studied this?
I was having a walk yesterday and I saw this lady. She had, these masks, these plastic see-through one. But this wasn't see-through. It was completely dark. I don't know. She looked a mixture of Darth Vader and Darth Vader gone wrong and someone picking up a grenade. It was just kind of like it's, there's a lot of fear out there and a lot of people.
Have you seen the guys early on who are wearing, those upturned water bottles that you have in the water dispensers?
Yeah.
they were wearing those as protection. They kind of cut them out in such a way that they could stick their head in them. Seriously.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there is this debate, I mean, on a more serious note, there is this debate going on, isn't there, about how we proceed from here. What happens next? And are we going to enter a world of environmental consciousness, understanding that less noise is good for us? A really good article I was reading this morning talking about the fact we've become noise blind, because we are surrounded consistently by this, effect of constant noise, whether it's 21st century machinery or whether it's just the piped music in restaurants, which I still don't understand why people... Who said that was a good idea? I can't... 80% of the people surveyed go, could you turn it down? I'm having a conversation here. Apart from the one person who's sitting there, which is normally me, eating by themselves, trying to not dip the book in the gravy or kind of read the fork. And that process of understanding our world, when it's stripped away and we get to the bare bones of things, which is kind of where we've been, of a simpler, more basic existence, is very appealing. I just worry about human nature as to whether we'll actually continue with it and whether we'll take it on board. The thing that I related it to was the Twin Towers, the 9/11 Twin Towers, when there was this very, very poignant point made, which was that the people that were rushing up those stairs to rescue the people who were right at the very top of that building earned a mere fraction of those people that they were rescuing. And we needed to do something about that. And yes, if you go to New York now, there is still a degree of being revered if you are a New York firefighter. There is an aura about them that still continues from that day, but I'm not sure that it's changed their pay structure. I'm not sure that they're rewarded any better when we said, look at the valor of these people, look at what they do, look at what we need. They save our lives. And we're clapping every Thursday night here in the UK for our carers and the delivery drivers and the nurses and the doctors and so on. Will we still be doing that in another 6 months' time? I question it.
Well, my theory, I'm actually with you. I think that everybody is talking big now and we're all out clapping and all over the world. But as soon as the clapping stops, I think they're not going to get any more money. They're not going to get any more attention. And that's a tragedy, really. They should be given the money now, whilst everybody is in that mode. Because I don't think anybody in any country would go, actually, don't give nurses or care workers more money now. But now is the time. But what I think most governments know is that people's memories are short.
Yes.
And they'll just go back to normal. And I was talking to somebody this morning, and he was hopeful that the environment would be, recognized, and sort of people would fly less and everything. And I said, I'd love to have your optimism, but I don't have that. I actually think people go back so quickly and they forget so quickly that, this is meant to be a laugh. It's not many laughs at the moment, but...
Sorry, far too serious.
No, but you know what I mean. It's sad to me that we get there. One of the things that Bernardo and I have been doing via this podcast is giving people real life tips on how that they can cope better. And we've got one of the world's most renowned voiceover artists and conference moderators in the world. What could people do now that they're stuck on Zoom or Teams or anything to improve the way they come across?
People often ignore the voice. The voice is a complete giveaway about what you feel. People talk about, the eyes being the windows to the soul. No, they're not. The voice is the window to your soul. The voice is what gives you away incessantly. And in fact, there's a really very nice example from a long time ago. You're talking late 60s, early 70s, of the first time that an American beer company decided to use a female voiceover on their adverts, Because up until then, beer was macho, and therefore you had male voices who advertised beer. And they thought, here's a bright idea. Have a woman's voice to advertise it. And they did this, and they auditioned the woman, and they got her to do the recording. And the recording was then sent to the client, and the client went, yes, fantastic, we like it. And then was sent to the final, the advertiser, the beer maker. And they sat and listened to it, and they said, she doesn't like beer. And they went, what? No, the voiceover, she doesn't like beer. They said, really? And they went back and asked her and said, do you like beer? And she went, no, I can't stand it. I drink white wine myself. Here was a voiceover professional who could not disguise the fact that the words she was being made to say, even though she was being paid handsomely for them, were not to her liking, and her voice gave her away. And I think voices do. I think our voices will give, the interesting thing about Zoom is we can be seen. And boy, are we analyzing what happens behind people, aren't we? Aren't we looking at people's bookcases and going, yeah, you haven't read any of those, have you? Or you've hardly got any. You must be a really boring dinner party guest. Or really, you should have tidied that up. Let's be honest. Look at it. It's a mess. We're expecting, like the famous BBC interview, the kids coming in the background, and you desperately trying to shove them out of the way until your wife comes in and hauls them out bodily. No, there's a lot of things going on in Zoom calls, but people don't think about the voice, and the level of interest that you portray with your voice is really important. And there's another little interesting thing about that. It was a little game that I used to play in the days when Radio 4's Today program, the national kind of important politics news program that is broadcast on the nation's best-known speech network, you could always tell when somebody was doing what's called down the line. It meant they're not in the same studio as the person who they're talking to, yet the studios are connected by a high-quality telephone line, which means they could appear to be because the voice is of the same quality. But when you can't see somebody, and we all know this from telephone calls, you kind of raise the pitch of your voice. Like you need to throw your voice a little bit further so you can just be heard a little further away than you can from this very intimate microphone that, the three of us are dealing with. And you could always tell, because the questions would be a bit more like that. So, Minister, do you think this is a really wise policy to pursue? And because you don't see people, that effect changes how you speak and where you pitch your voice. But the difficult thing with Zoom is because you see people, you can actually relax the voice, and it can feel like you just have a bit of a monotonous chat, really, because you're a bit bored, really. And a lot of the requirement right now is to motivate people. I think leadership has been fantastic in this lockdown. We're watching our politicians trying to do leadership in an environment where they haven't got the foggiest clue what's actually wrong or right. And we know there's this kind of thing that goes on in history, and it has done for years and years and years, which is, something awful happens and you lead your people to safety. And very often, these governments, if they are nefarious governments, have invented something and then led their people to safety to enhance how they are perceived. But we're watching leaders now really struggling with how to keep people involved. And the voice for leadership is really, really important. How you rate somebody's voice, how you hear somebody, whether they are of leadership potential. Boris is quite interesting. All going on. And then he'll start suddenly prattling and kind of about the Aeneid or, Ovid or something to do with some great Latin scholarly thing that he once read on a Tuesday afternoon. And that process kind of puts him in a position where you get kind of drawn in that he's perhaps knowledgeable, a buffoon, but he's knowledgeable and he has a leadership skills. He's a big fan of Churchill, of course, wrote a very good book about Churchill. And I think he feels that there might be slightly Churchillian moments as well. But it's a really important thing that if you're leading a group of people, a team of people, you've got to have a voice that people buy into. Because Paul, you know much more about this than I do, but people don't buy into a vision unless they buy into the leader first. And your voice is going to be one of the reasons why people go, yeah, you actually sound like you know what you're talking about.
Paul Boross is the pitch doctor, professor of humourology and business activator. If you would be interested in booking him to speak, train your teams, or executive coach you, you can reach him by going to www.paulboross.com now.
The idea around, obviously, how important the voice is and obviously leaders. I think in this time, more than anything, I really believe that we're going through a period of time that a lot of people are questioning so many different things. Obviously, leaders is one of them. I mean, there's a lot of them that come to mind, like you think, oh my God. And the thing is basically, they've never had or run a business. They've never been responsible for things. And obviously, there's a lot of them now that have to make these decisions and step forward and take responsibility. And I feel that part of that is understanding as well is that we have to also be responsible because, there's a degree of how much we can rely on these leaders, to kind of direct us into a bright future. But I suppose for a lot of people is understanding their responsibility and how they can make those decisions for them to see what the new outcome. There was a data here, I think it was sharing in the US, around 70% of businesses, have stopped trading, and because obviously there's just not an opportunity for them to be able to be at their shop front. How does one, I suppose things are okay and good for you. You're at home, you've got your voice, and you can work with a microphone. You've got a job, but there's a lot of other people out there that don't have that opportunity. What would your advice be? And I'm just asking you individually, what would your advice be of those that really need to take responsibility for their own life and start looking at how they can reinvent or come up with a new plan of coming up with something? Any thoughts on that?
I'm a great lover of the online course, I have to say. And the fact that you can go to a variety of sources, everything from the Yales and the Oxfords and Cambridges of the world, they've all got these, what they call MOOCs, aren't they? Yeah. These online courses that you can access, but even kind of really teeny-weeny ones. Where you can kind of figure out, I got sent details of how to be a dog groomer the other day. I think if I'm looking for something different to do, and as that becomes possible, I would think that would be a skill that wouldn't be bad to add to my selection.
I think you're barking up the wrong tree, to be honest with you, for your skills.
And we're here all week.
Yeah, good night.
But I do think the opportunity for self-improvement what would we have done without the internet in this? What on earth would we have done?
There's a great question. What would we have done without it? Because, we still have, time with people and see people. Now, it's not quite the same, because yesterday I was out for my walk late in the evening, because I only go out late in the evening, because then you don't bump into people being crazy. But I met somebody I knew from the local pub, and we were walking down, and I got such a buzz out of seeing somebody close up. I was viscerally, changed by the whole thing. I was excited.
Oh, I played golf. I played golf with my brother for the first time in months, about 5 days ago. It was the most exciting, magical experience of the past 9 weeks. I was terrible, but it was wonderful. I haven't quite understood, because the way I play golf, I'm socially distanced from everybody from the moment I leave the tee. Nobody sees me. I'm off in the brush somewhere looking for the balls. So I don't understand why we haven't been able to play golf for the whole of the lockdown time. It seemed to be much more sensible.
I completely agree. I was going to say you stood on two, you hit two good balls, but that was the stood on a rake joke. Which
I have a real. I have the definition of irony for what I'm going to do later on this evening, though, because a group of friends and I are doing an online virtual escape room.
How does that work?
Yes, well, we have an avatar that we control, and you can book, 4 or 5 different screens, and you all question, and I use the avatar to answer various questions and try and figure. But I mean, how weird is that? We're all locked down in our own rooms using an avatar to get out of an escape room that's remotely somewhere else, completely different from where we are. I mean, it's kind of how bonkers things have got, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is. And you were saying, I mean, about the internet. I mean, I think, when was it? Was it in 1900s when there was a big pandemic as well? And obviously there was no, people were wearing masks and there was social distancing and people were also quarantined and things. Look, I mean, I particularly think that, I particularly think we've been very lucky, because we obviously have the internet and we are much better off than many other countries. I mean, I was reading about Somalia yesterday, obviously, who they're going through coronavirus, hunger, war, and some kind of something else that they're going through, cholera or something. And you think, how unlucky can you get? But look, the fact is that there's billions of people that are much worse than us. And I really, really believe that this is going to be a phenomenal opportunity. I think that the way that things are changing, and at the speed that things are changing, obviously because they have to, all these restaurants now have to sell coffee through takeaways, and businesses that were only, shop fronts now are online. All these commercial buildings are no longer going to be around, kind of like cars don't drive, there's no parking meters. It's just, everything has just changed. The business, the idea, the concept, and then those things, kind of the things that we get to appreciate. Paul appreciated having a little walk, having a little bit of an airing and being able to speak to someone, and you getting lost in the bushes, trying to find your ball playing golf, kind of like we start really valuing things. I can't wait to go to a place and just bump into people and someone drop my drink on the floor. I'm going to say, thank you so much. That was so great of you,
But there is now a visceral reaction in me when I'm watching movies and so on, which have obviously clearly been filmed before coronavirus, yes. And there are people shaking hands, and there is that moment. It doesn't last long, but it's a momentary sort of, no, you can't. Oh, no, yes, you can, because that was filmed before. Or crowds of people. I call it corona noia. Because there's a momentary sort of, whoa, oh, no, that's quite okay. The other thing that's happening is changing things. So the serious example in this instance is they've been talking for 15 years about doing virtual GP appointments. Coronavirus turns up. They managed to do it in 5 weeks. Yeah. And there's no further argument. That is how GP appointments will take place from now on. But the thing I'm most delighted about is electric scooters. I'm a huge fan of electric scooters. I have one. As a driver, if I go out in the UK in it and the police stop me, they can put points on my license. I'm saving the environment here. And, of course, in various capital cities, Paris in particular, but I've also been to Atlanta in the US. They have loads of them. I'm not sure if they're in New York, but certainly Amsterdam, I think Rome. There's so many capital cities where companies like Bird and Lime have all gone in and I'm afraid they littered the place a bit. But they're such fun. You go in, you find one which is on a map on your phone. You're going to open it up with your camera, with your phone, and off you go on it. And it's brilliant. And I love my little electric scooter. And because of coronavirus, they are now looking at having these things made legal, particularly in London. So I'm so looking forward to being on an electric scooter. If that is one of the changes that coronavirus has provided us with, then I'm in favour.
Of coronavirus.
Yes.
No.
All in favour of coronavirus.
Let's have another one. Let's see what that changes.
Exactly. This one worked so well.
Yes. The naming thing was the funniest thing. It was one of the Trump spokespeople whose names, and there's so many of them that I've now forgotten who they are. There was somebody who turned around and said, "We're on COVID-19, not COVID-1." No. 19 is the year it first appeared. But yeah, I mean, does COVID-20 come in and change a whole bunch of stuff as well? They do say we're going to have it for the next couple of years, don't they? We're not going to be kind of living without it for a while.
Which is why we're going to need a skill set that has developed. And it's Darwinian that if you adapt, you will survive. And so I think your point about sort of learning more through online things and everything is very well made. Let's take it back into the real world. You've worked and interviewed and introduced people, some of the biggest sort of names, in politics and business over your career. Who has impressed you most and why, Jon?
Two immediate examples spring to mind. And they're both politicians. And I think politicians are a really interesting breed. My father wanted to be a politician because he was standing for the Lib Dems. He never made it. He came very, very close, though. And somebody at the time when I talked about this said to me, be careful of people who think they have the right to tell you what to do. And it was a very good piece of advice, in fact. I did a conference with John Major, and John Major, particularly with Spitting Image, was, the grey man, his pants outside his trousers, eating, peas with a knife.
For those of those people who are from other countries, John Major was our Prime Minister in the UK.
Yes, 1990 to 97, was it? Something like that. The successor to Margaret Thatcher. And the most unlikely sort of person as well, because he had a voice that sounded a bit like that. I'm still here and I'm still talking to you. And because of that, you kind of associated, again, we're back to voices. The voice that you heard kind of made you think this man's a bit of an idiot. And then I met him. He's quite a tall man. And I was amazed by his charisma. He was an incredibly charismatic man in person, and you suddenly realized how he'd managed to reach that position. Because the stuff that we normally need to judge people on, which is about this, how people are heard and appear, and whether we think they're interesting or not, we make a judgment upon them. Every time, as Paul, and Bernardo, I'm sure as well, you turn up on stage, you've got 30 seconds, and the audience have made a judgment about you, about how you're dressed, how you sound, how you've walked onto stage, and what the first few words might be. But it's mostly about how you look and sound. And then they're going, okay, I'll listen. So the thing I've always done in conferences, my opening link is the only thing I rehearse. And I rehearse it and I rehearse it and I rehearse it. Because if I get it wrong and I lose the audience in that opening link, I fight for the rest of the day to get them back on side. So that first appearances are really important. It's been said so many times before. So John Major was really charismatic. Bill Clinton's another one. Bill arrived late for a conference in Sweden it was for a Swedish bank. They'd invited about 800 of their CEOs. It's a very senior audience there. And he's late, even though he's coming in on his own aeroplane. It's not like there's any schedules. He hasn't been delayed. He's just late. Anyway, he turns up, and it's taken us ages to arrange this because Bill's staff basically say, we're not going to have him interviewed by any journalists. And you go, okay. Well, we were lucky because we were trying to make this approach about 6 months after Kay Burley from Sky News had done an interview with him. And it's like, but you just did it, So we were able to say, you can't use that excuse. And it was largely then, okay, well, yeah, all right then, yes. Well, you have to submit 36 questions beforehand so that we can vet them and make sure they're okay. So I did all my research, submitted 36 questions before. Why it was 36, I've got no idea. But anyway, we submitted all the questions and he got them. Anyway, he turns up late. I've been trying to entertain the audience with what little I could muster as some form of basic comedy acts, to keep them entertained.
I was going to say, Jon, maybe you got stuck in traffic or in the tube on the way there. I mean, you should have kind of been a bit more understanding.
Very, very possibly, because of course, no outriders, no limousines with black hatted chauffeurs. Actually, very interesting. Before I complete it, the very interesting thing he did afterwards. And this is again goes back to charisma, because the limousines are sitting outside with the chauffeurs and their cats standing there, and he excuses himself from the party, all kind of thank you, Bill, waving you goodbye, and he goes over and he shakes the hand of each chauffeur. He goes up to them and goes, thank you very much indeed for the job you're doing. How important do you think those chauffeurs then felt.
Yeah.
You know, it's a simple little thing, and we know the trick of charisma is taking somebody's status and lifting it up to yours, and they don't come much bigger status than Bill Clinton. So that, you know, that was charisma at work. And when I teach charisma, and I have a charisma course, I hate the name, because the moment you talk about teaching charisma, people go, well, that's kind of being false, isn't it? I mean, charisma is about schmoozing people and not being really you. And it's not. Charisma is about understanding how to build those relationships and understanding status. And we all need to understand it, particularly in sales, because in sales, we always start off as a sales guy. We're lower status than the person who's trying to buy from us. So understanding how status and charisma works can change your sales life. Write to me, I'll tell you how. But the process that's going on there is a really interesting one, because charisma is not bestowed upon the fortunate few. Charisma is a set of behaviors that we learn, and we can all learn to change our behavior. We may not want to do so, but we can all do it if we so choose. Anyway, to go back to this big auditorium where we're doing Bill Clinton, Bill comes in and it's, and ladies and gentlemen, the former president of the United States. And as you know, if you are talking to a former president of the United States, you have to use the term Mr. President all the time, even though they are no longer presidents. Little known fact. He comes on, rounds of applause, everyone's whooping. Well, they're not. They're Swedish. They're not really whooping and cheering. They're kind of. That's a great thing about Sweden. I do love Sweden as a country. They have a word for not upstaging your neighbor, not doing better, having a bigger house than. Don't ask me what the word is. I worked in Sweden for 15 years, and I only know shishlik and koo, and that's about it. That's chicken and cow. Oh, and hund, which is dog, because they speak such good English, and they've been taught it since the age of 5. Okay, so they're not going to waste time getting you to learn Swedish. They'll just talk English to you. But I'm on one other phrase that I can't repeat here, but it was rude, and it never got me anywhere personally or in business. Anyway, back in the room, Bill Clinton stands up and does a 20-minute speech that we're not expecting. We just thought it was going to be question and answer. We're going to go into the interview. So I'm sitting there going, oh, God, okay. So I'm making notes on the speech. And I get up there, and of course, I know that the moment I get up there, I can't ignore the speech, but I've got 36 vetted questions in my hand that I know he's supposedly expecting. So I launch him with one of the vetted questions at the beginning, and he answers it, and it's all fine. And I thought, I'm going to have to go off-piste here. I'm going to have to ask him about something he's just said. Otherwise, I look like, A, I wasn't interested, B, I wasn't in the room, and I'm completely ignoring all the amazing things he just said about Sweden and the environment. It was a very nice speech. It was all about recycling and how the Swedes are very good at it, and business plans that they have and so on, and why they kind of lead the world in it. And he answered the question without batting an eyelid. And I thought, okay, well, that's all right. We'll carry on. And so the interview went on for about 20, 25 minutes. And off we go backstage. And he kind of says, yeah, those are really good questions. Thank you so much. And I went and realized that none of his team had shown him any of the questions that we had done beforehand and that were specifically vetted. They were simply covering their asses. That I didn't go, so tell me, what color was Monica Lewinsky's underwear?
I was going to say that wasn't the question, I hope. I didn't want to say anything. So, yeah, and I suppose at the end of the day, hey, he's got his staff that they've got to do their job and, make sure you ask these questions, and he probably wouldn't have cared anything that you would have fired at him. He is was the former president. I mean, the guy could handle anything.
Well, it's because I met him at Soho House because he was doing a small talk at Soho House, and I knew the general manager, and they said, would you like to meet Bill Clinton? And he's like one of those people that if you work in our businesses, he is at the pinnacle. He's one of the best orators you've ever seen and charismatic. And I only met him for about 3 or 4 minutes, and we were sort of in the green room. But for those 3 or 4 minutes, and this is something that I think everybody should realize, he didn't look away from me once. We just engaged. We were talking about music. And when you're at a party and people, you can tell when they're not quite there because they're looking over your shoulder for somebody more interesting.
Exactly.
He was completely engaged the whole time. And we're talking, I'm a former musician, he's a former musician as a sax player, and just completely committed to that conversation. And extraordinary. And that was real charisma. I talk about it on stage in some of my courses. So you can, and Jon is a great person to train with, as is Bernardo, and hopefully as is me, but you can train charisma because...
Oh, absolutely.
Well, actually, do you want to say a little bit about that? Because Bernardo...
Well, I was going to disagree very quickly, and then just let you guys get on with it. I was going to be, there's some people that I just don't think you can. I mean, they're just miserable, love being miserable, and really do anything they can to carry on being miserable and making everyone else miserable around them. So anyway, but on that note, I do agree, but carry on.
Misery loves company. Well, there is, I mean, because charisma is about how you purport yourself and how you carry yourself and the effect you have on other people in front of you. And you're absolutely right, Paul. There are people just generally, are bored with you, because they're waiting for somebody more interesting just over your shoulder. There's no eye contact whatsoever. But Bill has that magical ability to make you feel like the complete focus of his attention right then, right there, and right now. And that's right at the very core of this. There is the process of teaching people to be better when they are appearing in front of others. And we're kind of back to Zoom in a way, which is we began this conversation, is very interesting. I was asked to train somebody for a well-known car company a number of years ago. And I do a lot of presentation training because I've done a lot of it. I've been standing on stages since I was 12. And the process of doing that and appearing interesting and engaging your audience is not a complicated one. But you're right, there are some people who don't really have the capacity to do it. And I was asked, could I train this person in presentation skills and could I give them a personality? To which the reply is, well, the impossible we can do at once, miracles take a little longer. And so I sat down with this guy, and the process that I go through is we get away from business, because all the presentations you generally do are about business, and we start concentrating on what do they love in their lives? What are the things that make them interested? What are the things that they are fiery and passionate about? And once you start talking to them about that, suddenly the voice changes, suddenly the demeanor changes. I'm preaching to the converted here because you guys know this like the back of your hand. But this is the process of pinching that passion for something else and inserting it into something that they might not necessarily either know how to be passionate about or indeed be that passionate about. And this comes down to occasionally people are asked to talk about things when actually they really shouldn't be talking about things because they're not that passionate about it. And maybe it's their job, but the giveaway is in the voice and they're not passionate about what they do. And really, you should not be giving that talk. You should be looking for another job instead. It's a bit difficult to say that sometimes to some people who are very senior, but occasionally the truth hurts. And once we started talking to him, once I got this out of him, I realized that we were going to have to go a different route. And what I discovered was he was the person to whom everybody in the company came to when they wanted to ask a question. He was the boffin. He was the professor, effectively. So what we couldn't do was make him be the jack-in-the-box and ta-da, showman, because he was never going to have that capacity, a bit like you were saying, Bernardo. Sometimes there are people who don't have that level and that ability. But what we did was we made him the professor, the boffin, the guru, such that when he presented from a position in his head of all-knowing and all-seeing because he had all the knowledge. He'd been there that long. He was surrounded by youngsters who didn't know the business or indeed the company as well as he did. And once we gave him a status to work from, it changed what he did. He was never going to be enigmatic. He was never going to be sparkly and witty and wonderful. But what he was a source of great information and reliable, good information, which is very useful, of course, to any company and very valuable these days in an era of fake news.
Well,
so,
I think that's true, which is why I love it when we have these discussions. And, I know that Bernardo's comment was flippant and because he, like me, believes that you can change people or at least move people along, because that's what he does. But actually, there is such a thing as quiet charisma.
Yeah.
That you don't have to be showy to do it. You can actually just, and that's what you can teach people. And I thought your story, Jon, was great at emphasizing that actually you don't try and shove people into the same costume. It actually, there are some people who you need to shine in different ways, and quiet charisma is a way of shining.
It's why when people ask me about presentation, so can you do 12 people on a presentation course? And go, yeah, I can give you the basics, but I can probably print those out on a laminated card and hand them to me. You don't need to stand there for 3 hours. Because you're all different, because you all have different requirements to deal with your personal presentation skills, I've got to do it one-to-one. And that's not me doing it because I want to say, yes, if I do individual sessions, you make more money per session. It's because genuinely you have to do these individually because everyone's different, as you said.
And I think part of it is and obviously kind of it is our expertise. We help people and bring things out of people and let them see, things that they don't see or recognize themselves. And I think one of the key words for me has always been, since I got into kind of, the personal development is around awareness. And I think the problem is with a lot of people is either their ego or simply the lack of knowledge is to simply be aware. So kind of like, and you've said it, someone can teach something and all of a sudden, like, everyone's like, dropping off their heads, like, well, that's kind of an indicator, there's something going on when everyone's like, or checking their phones every 2 minutes and they're not paying attention. It's because you're not calibrating, you're not really seeing, but you're not being aware, you don't want to be aware. And I think that the key thing with all this is about being aware of your weaknesses. And then exploring, how can I enhance who I am? Which is what we're talking about, enhancing, because it isn't about, hey, I'm going to create a completely different you. It is about enhancing what you already have and teaching you some skills. And I think that's what, if anything, should hope people are using or taking advantage of this time, is to learn the things that they don't know.
All good speakers are listeners as well.
Absolutely.
But they're listening for something in particular a lot of the time. And that's the bum shuffle. Because the more bum shuffles you can hear in the room, the less good. Speak English, man. The less well you're going down, the less attention people are paying to you. So good speakers always listen for bum shuffles.
Well, can we get that on a quote? We'll get that on the banner for the podcast.
Listening for the bum shuffle.
Yeah, but actually, you're right. But I think good speakers, good communicators, because we're talking to an audience out there who have to communicate on Zoom, are listening in different ways. You're not just, the ears are not the only place to listen. You can tell if somebody's not interested by the way they hold themselves, their body language. If somebody's looking over your shoulder, as we were saying, or a thing, and going, oh, yeah, yeah, that's interesting. But the point is that some people need to be trained to look out for that. And they don't realize that those things are important. I've seen so many speakers who looked above the audience the whole time. And because they said, I didn't like looking in people's eyes because it made me nervous. And I go, that's where your feedback loop is in front of you. And so actually, I think that Zoom is quite a good feedback loop. It's not perfect, but at least you're seeing something. Auditory, if you're just listening to something, you have to listen in a very special way to make sure that you're hearing what people are thinking. I don't know what you think. Bernardo, do you think that people need to be trained to listen in different ways?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I think I've shared this before where, all of a sudden, you ask someone, they ask you, how are you? I'm really well. And, how are you? And then all of a sudden, you literally, as far as I'm concerned, they could be doing that with their head. Because they're just not listening. I can see that they're not listening. Or when they ask you a question and they're not listening because they're already preparing the answer. So, look, unfortunately, I can see all these things. I normally tend to stop when someone's asked me for something and I'm giving them the feedback and then they're not listening to me. And I know that I stop talking. And then all of a sudden they come back and, sorry, you just don't. And then I carry on. But then I have their attention. But I was going to say, and obviously with much of your expertise, Jon, is around the idea of and I don't know how much. I know it said, that is it 70% is how you say it, or the tonality of your voice, and only 6% is
right. This is the Albert Moravian stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and there's different people that say different things around that, and is it reality or not? But obviously, the tonality of your voice is extremely important and essential in order for you to communicate. What do you feel is I mean, and we're all different. Some of us are more visual. I mean, I make lots of pictures in my mind for any ideas, any new things that I want to do. But I do love listening, and I'm dyslexic, so I, for example, enjoy audiobooks, and I love, the readers, reading their books to me. What's your thoughts, as a pro? What do you feel people maybe connect better more? Because right now, as you said, with Zoom, hey, I'm looking at your books. Why has he got that case next to the door? All these things, that we start. What do you think is the best way of communicating or engaging with people?
To find out about my latest projects, get a free coaching lesson, or download my book, go to www.bernardo-moya.com.
So I'm radio trained. Yeah. That's where I began, and the stuff that I've known for voiceover is as with most things, it's about a fifth of or tenth of what I do. It is tiny, but it's what I'm most recognized for. So I spent 25, 30 years on radio, BBC local, BBC national radio, and then went to work for the London speech station LBC, and those networks taught me a lot because they were pre-internet days. Nowadays, if you are broadcasting and you're not sure about something, you have a keyboard in the studio and you're busily looking something up to add to it. And therefore, you're not listening to the person you're talking to. And I hear it so often, somebody repeating a question to something that somebody answered previously because you've not been engaged with them. And when you're in a radio studio, there are other things going on. Your producer's talking to you. And the producer role is a really, really interesting one. Paul, I don't know if you agree with me on this. I mean, you and I are both performers. We require attention, and we require somebody to recognize that we are performing and to tell us about whether it was any good or not.
And sorry, John, just on that note very quickly, Paul requires a lot of attention. But anyway.
But we like feedback. We need the feedback. And of course, this day, now we're very, very old. We're pretty good at ignoring the bad feedback, and we just lap up the good feedback. Whereas when we were younger, we used to get upset and hurt when somebody said, "That was shit, Paul. Don't ever do that again."
Yeah, that was you who said it, though, wasn't it?
Yes, but I had a lot of other people who wanted to say it. I was just their my vocal mouthpiece. So radio is a really interesting medium. Your audience is right in front of you. Their ear is literally inches from your mouth. You are talking directly to them. Nobody can get in there. No, not even the producer can get in between you and the listener. It's one of the reasons why radio presenters tend to make okay TV presenters, but TV presenters don't always make good radio presenters. Because for the camera to see you on television, you have to be 6 foot back from it. And therefore, you are always projecting yourself a little bit towards the camera and into somebody else's front room. It's very rare that you get somebody who is not, as a presenter, I'm not talking about acting on TV, I'm talking about as a presenter, who does not have a level of projection into this kind of empty black hole where if first time you ever stand in front and present and do a piece to camera, I remember it being this kind of deep black hole that was kind of sucking you in, and you were desperate to be distracted by other things, and were very easily distracted. If somebody came up and went, "Hi, Mum," you go, "Oh, I've lost my train of thought. I can't remember what I was saying." But TV and radio are very, very different media, and radio producers are the people who have the ability to get a better performance out of you than you knew you had without going, "No, you need to do it like this." They are the ultimate people at leading from the back. And it's what I couldn't ever do that. I knew I would be a lousy radio producer. It was why I always ended up behind the microphone, not behind the studio wall or not behind the studio glass. So I think that process of understanding how you present yourself and how you push yourself is very often associated with where you've come from and what your background is. And so my radio background makes me quite a good listener because I had to be. I was doing national breakfast radio shows 6 mornings a week for Radio 5 when it first started. And we got sent the cuttings, photocopied cuttings, from all the work for our guests the following morning, or the topics we were going to cover the following morning. There were bites to our houses, about 6, 7 o'clock at night. We read through them. You'd watch the 9 o'clock news on the BBC, as it was then, as the final, that's what's happening in the world, before you had to be up at 4:30 a.m. to go in and do 6 till 9 every morning on the radio. And you had to learn that stuff. You had to know your stuff, because you couldn't go, oh, hang on a minute, I'll just Google the internet for that. How many times did they win the crab fishing championship? You can't do any of that back then. And it made you listen, because the really good, and Parkinson was brilliant at this. Michael Parkinson, chat show host from the 1970s on BBC television. He was very, very good at listening and conversing. The best interviews are conversations. So one of the little exercises that happens at the beginning of Charisma is an exercise that I know you will know, Paul, because you've worked in comedy and you'll know about the process of, what's the word? Completely slipped my mind. Improvisation. Thank you very much indeed. That was the word. So you'll know about this, Paul, because you come from a comedy background, and you'll know all about improvisation. And improvisation requires you to listen to the other person. Otherwise, it falls flat on its nose. So not only do you have to listen to it and build on it. So if I say, Paul, let's fly to the moon on the back of an elephant. And you go, yeah, let's wear pink tutus while we're doing it. Yeah, let's have cocktails with flamingos in too. The thing builds. But if I go, Paul, let's go and fly to the moon on the back of an elephant, you go, why?
Or there isn't an elephant, which is, it's called in improvisation a block, because there's two things. There's yes and, which good listeners do, and yes but, which is what bad interviewers do. But, so you build on it, and then you build into a rapport with the person you're interviewing in. So I think it's a very useful exercise. And actually, our listeners can do it with people on Zoom.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, but is the worst, of course, isn't it? Because it's actually a lie. Yes, but means no, but I don't trust you enough to tell you the truth. And so it's what happens a lot in British business, I'm afraid. And yes, it is all about listening. So we play an exercise where you have to listen to what the last person said, otherwise you can't say anything yourself. And then you build the process. And we talk to people and say, that's at the heart of charisma. Being charismatic is about listening to other people. And as human beings in general, and you'll see this in meetings all the time, we're actually very fond of the sound of our own voices. We're very fond of the sound of our own opinions, and we're desperate to get our word in. One of the great tricks of meetings, I've found, is actually wait until everybody's had their say. And then people suddenly realize that you haven't spoken. And then go, John, you're very quiet. You haven't said anything. And you can go, strokey beard, well, after everything that I've heard, my view is this. And they'll go, ooh, that sounds very wise. It's not wise at all. You just listen to everyone else shout their mouths off. And it's quite easy to come up with a sensible opinion that appeals to people at that point.
Well, but that's a great technique. I mean, I think that the best leaders are the best listeners.
Yes,
because that's all you need. Is everybody will tell you all the information that you need as long as you're listening to it, as long as you're not, as Bernardo said earlier, rehearsing what you're about to say.
Here's the other aspect of that. Not only are the great leaders are good listeners, but they understand brevity as well, which I haven't really done very well on during this conversation, I hasten to add, because I end up talking for Britain. But
it's all right, John, because neither Bernardo and I have been listening to you.
Sorry, what was your name again? But the art of brevity is a really interesting one. And I think you can apply this to Zoom meetings. I mean, if you are going to go on Zoom meetings, set a time limit. Set a time limit for when this meeting is going to end, because it forces people to be concise. It's actually the same in sales as well. I worked with a very well-known telecoms company for a number of years on their presentations. I was moderating a lot of the stuff they did at the huge, great, multinational conferences where all the same sort of style of telecoms companies also turned up. And they were intent on telling you everything about their new box with the diodes and the leads and the things and everything inside it. And you had to say to them, no. You do what they do in television trailers or film trailers. You give them the highlights. You give them the bits that create the scratch that they then have to itch and go, I need to know more. Local TV news programs do it every day. Exploding tires. Are they on your car? And you go, I don't know. Are they? Crap, I better watch. And then, of course, the exploding tires item isn't until right at the very end of the show, at which point you watch all the other boring stuff like local councils and man poisoned by burger, etc. So you get to the eventual answer, which answers the question, and it sometimes can be a bit of a letdown as well. But the trailer is the highlights, the bits that make you go, I've got to do that. We did this with the telecoms company and cut down their presentation, which would have been an hour and a half, about the latest box that was going to make their mobile signals even more fabulous. We cut it down to 25 minutes. We told the audience it was going to be 30, but we actually did it in 25, which meant they got 5 minutes back in an environment where they were desperately trying to run around and go and see lots of other people too. And it's like, wow, we finished early. Fantastic. You feel even better about the company you've just spoken to because they haven't overrun. And we filled it not with their own speakers. We had 2 of their speakers and 3 of their customers, which again, as you well know, is one of the great techniques of getting people to buy into something about other people who are in your situation going, do I like this? I did, and I bought the company. So that is, in a nutshell, the simplest way of doing things, because you don't tell people everything, because you don't need to know everything. People will come up and ask questions if they're interested, and 90% of them aren't interested in everything. But there will be 10% who go, that was very interesting when you said that bit. I need to know some more. I said, well, yes, let me tell you. And then you can go into the spiel that takes an hour and a half. But don't bore everybody else with it. Keep it short, which is probably a cue for me to shut up.
There is an old music business proverb, which is, don't bore us, get to the chorus.
Very good. I like that. I'm going to put that alongside the old grey whistle test, which is one of my lovely, useless pieces of trivia. You know why it's called the old grey whistle test, don't you?
I do, but you tell our listeners.
No, go ahead, tell me.
So the old grey whistle test was what happened with musicals in the 1930s, 40s. And the man at the stage door was generally a man who had had a lot of experience in showbiz and was quite old and was known as the Old Grey. And it was he who would allow people in and out because he recognized all the artistes who passed his door because he'd been there so long. And when a new musical was put on, if the Old Grey could whistle some of the songs, indeed just one of the songs, from the musical after its first performance, then the musical would be a success. And that would be the Old Grey whistle test.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jon. I think, Paul, unless you've got anything else to add, I want to thank Jon very much for sharing. We discussed many things. So it's been very, very interesting. So, Jon, thank you so much. Paul?
It's a pleasure.
Jon, always a pleasure. And thank you so much for actually sharing your wisdom with us. It really was.
Such as it is, yes. Stay safe and stay alert.
We've heard God has spoken. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Take care.
Not at all. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to From Isolation to Inspiration. If you're interested in working with Bernardo and being coached or mentored by him, you can reach him via www.bernardo-moya.com. If you're interested in speaking at the Best You Expo, getting involved online, or the Best You TV, please go to www.thebestyou.co.